All right, we're here this week for another launch week. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and watching us. So, joined here by Nathan Wallace and Cody, who are going to be helping us walk through the week and understand what we've announced and some of the key insights behind the announcements overall. Start out with Monday was preventative security for cloud AI platforms. Specifically, we're launching support or additional support for AWS Bedrock, Azure Foundry, and GCP Vertex. Cody, you did a lot of work on these mods and releasing them. Can you give us some insight in terms of what was interesting about this, what was similar and different between the three providers, and how they're approaching providing these services out to their customers, and what controls that they have to what controls enterprises have in order to secure them and put guardrails around them?
Like you mentioned, Dave, there are a lot of similarities between them in terms of the capabilities that they offer and how they allow users to, interact with, popular LLMs, use the models available. A lot of them are very similar, and that was nice. So there's a lot of common ground between them, and no matter what platform you're on, I think you can really use LLMs in a really robust way today on the platforms. However, what I found most interesting actually was that all three of them, even though they had a lot of the same capabilities, and oftentimes when you're using them, or if you're an admin and kind of looking over all these accounts, the things that you want to safeguard for your organization or block users from doing things around, say, like content filters or which models are approved for use or inference routing, all of those principles are still just as important across each of the platforms, but the way that you enforce them or create those preventions is all very different. And for me, that was really confusing at first of just trying to figure out breaking down the server. There's multiple services across each of the providers. As an example, in GCP, there's the Vertex AI service. There's also a model Armor service. The notebooks service actually kind of has some cross-play with Vertex AI. And there's probably others that I'm also forgetting at the moment. AWS and Azure, a similar story. So in terms of making sure that we were able to look and account for the key services, look at the different mechanisms for in each of the different providers and the services to figure out how to create key preventions or show users how they can create preventions in their environment. As an example, in AWS, you have things like SCPs, which you can apply to the organization layer. However, AWS within Bedrock also have guardrails that you can create, and then you can create or rather enforce these guardrails in each region where Bedrock is allowed to be used. And within each guardrail, there's a number of settings that you can create and then create versions for and manage that way. So that's just one example, but Azure GCP, there are some similarities, but there's also, again, like I mentioned, differences in terms of how you do it, and each one is pretty provider/service specific as well.
Yeah, the thing I'm excited about in this space is that, like, if you look at AWS Bedrock, for example, and you got a large enterprise, you might have a lot of internal systems that people are working on and they want to add agentic capabilities to them, right? The core idea a lot of these companies can be, hey, well, we'll centralize the Bedrock services in like one location. But with guardrails, you can actually allow each of those applications to kind of use Bedrock within their application, build it into their ecosystem, but have centralized control over how they configure that, what models they can use, what are the limitations that those different teams can use when doing it. You basically allow federation of that and federation of the cost. You don't have to centralize the cost of running large language models into a central bucket within your organization. You can spread that out over your applications and do that just using the same model that we've used for other cloud services and rolling that out. So I'm excited to see what our customers can do with that and maybe give them a little bit more freedom in terms of how they're using services like Bedrock across their organization as well.
Yeah, I think, a lot, as always, but especially for these where there's a lot of complex settings and we're trying to make it easy for people to centralize, a lot of focus was, or a lot of time was spent rather, on making sure that the policy settings, the controls, kind of how easy it is, for people to wire those up within your guardrails workspace. A lot of focus went into that just to try to make it as easy as possible and kind of break down some of that complexity.
Very cool. And then on Tuesday, we kind of extended this to not just kind of the three major cloud providers, but also opening up and creating preventive security and our runtime security guardrails for Anthropic and for OpenAI. Could you talk a little bit about what went into the thinking there and some of the challenges in approaching like the way we approach problems and applying them to this new space?
It is a new space. So the first thing we really did was just try to figure out what is available, like what can you do, what can you configure, what can you enable, what can you disable, what can you control when you're using Claude, ChatGPT, or the platforms Anthropic plus OpenAI. So a lot of initially it was just what's available, what haven't we even seen yet. This is also new, which is exciting. So there's a lot that we can play with, and every week or I feel like every couple of days, I feel like they're coming out with new features. However, that does also make it a bit challenging, as in I feel like the platforms, the sites, the capabilities are always changing. So kind of keeping up with that and figuring out also what is available was on the more challenging end. However, what we were able to find out was when we looked at the Anthropic or OpenAI platforms, there were a lot of resources or within those platforms or different settings that we could look at. So key things like users, invitations, API keys, admin API keys, model inference routing. There was a lot that we could look at and then integrate, pull into guardrails, and then create controls around to not only give visibility, but also allow admins to actually, for instance, look at expired API keys and actually delete them just to making sure that they're getting cleaned up, or for users who have unapproved domains, making sure that those users also get removed or the invitations are canceled.
I think the main use case for this a lot is going to be like, looking at those API keys and making sure they're cleaned up, making sure they're the time expiry, et cetera. But there is also kind of like, hey, just what are the best practices, in terms of setting up my organization to be successful using these. And sometimes having guardrails policy settings staring you in the face gives you some idea in terms of what are the things that I need to ask questions about, what are the things that we need to make business decisions about, how some of these things are decided and set within our organization. So even from that standpoint, I think it adds value, and then keeping it from drifting over time, right? As different people come into role and do things, they might have different opinions on how that stuff is approached, and having guardrails kind of act as a central authority for those decisions is, I think, going to add value for those guys as well.
I think it was kind of alarming how much mess we already had in our own council when we reviewed those in guardrails. I mean, we're not a large and we're a smaller organization, and already it was like, whoa, okay, we got to get this clean and under control, and we tidied up a lot of stuff.
Yeah, the dog fooding of all this becomes important and useful for us. So glad we're building things that add value for us as well, and hopefully add value for our customers too.
Cody, how did it compare the two, like the ChatGPT Claude stuff versus the platform controls?
For instance, there's different websites you go to depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to manage and what role you have. So, for instance, for Anthropic, there's an Anthropic platform. You can go and manage users, API keys. I think it's workspaces for Anthropic, but there's also the Claude site you can go to. So if you're maybe doing more chats or kind of going into those workspaces and running things, but they're actually separate. I think it's like separate auth, separate interface, separate capabilities. And the alarming thing, or rather what we're waiting for, is that what we found is that in terms of what you can actually pull and manage programmatically is a little bit different at the moment. So for instance, for Anthropic platform, they do have public APIs that have an SDK you can interact with. However, for Claude, that platform, which actually has a lot of settings and stuff that you kind of do want to really review in your organization and kind of comb through, as far as we could tell, there's no public API available today. You have to go into the site and kind of manage things, view things, uncheck things. So there were some that we're still exploring on how we can kind of pull that in and help users to manage that. But like Dave had mentioned, because I think it's so new and they're moving so fast and things are changing every week, it feels like it does feel like there's some areas that they're still playing catch up or maybe finalizing some things before they, really make some additional public APIs available to help admins or organizations manage those key settings.
I think OpenAI and ChatGPT was the same, right? There was basically the platform of OpenAI, but not for the ChatGPT side with an API. What's weird to me is I just can't even imagine building a website without it being API first. I think we've done that since 20 14 since the earliest days of Turbot. And if I was vibe coding it out, I think that'd be way easier still to do in this world anyway. So it's fascinating to me that just they haven't evolved that way. I'm curious internally how it ended up being separate.
I wonder if it's a product related decision or a security related decision. It would be interesting to be behind the scenes of that a little bit and understand kind of
decision. It's just go fast at all costs. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, speaking of going fast, one of the Wednesday announcements that we had, basically using workload identity federation across GCP and Azure. So for those SaaS customers that use Turbot Guardrails, you may not know this, but behind the scenes, we actually host Turbot Guardrails on AWS. And so when we are doing cross-account trusts to AWS resources, those happen in one way because we can have, our AWS account essentially be trusted by your AWS account. There are really well-defined models for that and a lot of security on it. But for the longest time on Azure and for GCP, you've needed some sort of shared secret in order to have guardrails onboard, your Azure tenant or your Azure subscriptions or your GCP organization or your GCP projects. You need some sort of shared credentials, often in the guise of a service account, an access key, or service account with the access key, secret key that you would then have to put into guardrails, and then that will give us API level access out to those systems. With these new workload identity federations, we essentially can federate and trust whether you're using Guardrail SaaS or whether you're self-hosting guardrails within your own AWS account, trust the authentication using keyless authentication. No shared secrets need to cross over there. Simply a configuration that allows an entity on the AWS side to assume an identity within Azure or an identity within GCP to take actions and to reconfiguration and to take actions within those environments. So it's a huge win for our large enterprise customers. Whenever you're doing a new deployment, and we've done so many new deployments over the years, one of the things that's always been a friction point for us is going in and saying to the GCP administrator, we need a service account and access keys. And if you want to do guardrails, where guardrails is actually doing enforcement actions, then it's even a higher level of risk essentially in having those access keys with admin level permissions in the ecosystem, right? There's great ways that we've had to encrypt those and store them securely, and giving you ways to manage those via API so you could rotate them, etc. But that is all work that needs to be done. And so very happy that new deployments and existing customers can start to take advantage, essentially keyless connections between Guardrails hosting environments and the remote cloud services. So huge win for those customers. I think it's great for us, reduces friction when onboarding new environments and reducing the overall friction with the environment in terms of those cross-cloud connections.
Yeah, I actually gave this feature a try because I was curious just how it worked and was excited that there was a keyless way to kind of authenticate into both of them. The surprising thing was, I think due in part to how we had, we walk you through it, but in terms of setting those up compared to the previous ways of authenticating, I'd say it was actually just as easy, if not maybe a little bit easier actually. So I was surprised, happy that it was actually not. In my head, I wasn't quite sure what it was, and overall walking through with guardrails and being able to walk through the steps, make the changes in, say, Azure and AWS accounts where I needed to in order to set up that authentication was actually a lot easier than I expected. So pleasantly surprised, and hopefully users.
Yeah, again, another great opportunity for us to kind of dog through that and get rid of, a key that we would have to rotate occasionally as well. So I think it's a huge win for anyone that takes advantage of these new capabilities. So that wrapped up Wednesday, and then our huge new announcement on Thursday of Turbot Guardian. It is a brand new product category for us, specifically looking at guardrails for people who are vibe coding or using agentic software tools on their desktop. So Nathan, do you want to kind of walk us through the thinking behind the product and why we thought this was an important space to bring Turbot into?
Yeah, for sure. It's very exciting for us. I mean, we're obviously, like many people, so deep in these agentic tools at this point, whether it's called Code or Cursor or called Cowork or whatever it might be. Everybody in our organization is using them all the time. And one of the things we've found is we want to give them access to a lot of different systems so we can do a lot of stuff, right, ourselves. But we're also nervous and scared that that might break something or do something weird or whatever. We've had cases where someone's like, oh, I thought I was talking to Kubernetes cluster A, but at some point it decided to go off and find the other cluster B and just started talking to that. And I couldn't work out where my changes went. And we've seen, many examples externally as well of like, wait, why'd you delete my database or other things? So trying to work out how you can have the freedom to use these incredibly powerful tools to do your job and to do the things you want to do, but in a way that's safe. And so that's what we've been about really since Turbot started, right? Go faster safely. And that's, so it's a great fit for us. And we felt that the gap was really to put something that had a deep understanding of you and the systems you're working with. So, with Guardian, installs on your endpoint, it finds all the agents you have and you're working. So it collects all the information about your agents, your MCPs, the way you've got that configured machine. So what are you using? And then it asks, what could I reach? What's my blast radius from here? So it says, okay, what credentials are on this machine, whether they might be through a browser control or an AWS cred you've got there, or an environment variable or other things, and what projects are you working on? So it tries to work that out. And then it watches all the sessions in real time and every interaction you're making. And what it does is it deeply parses and understands all of those interactions. So it can tell the difference between whether you're talking to a database A, which is a production one, versus database B, which is a development one, and then what query even you're running against them. So, it's a read or it's a write or whatever. And then based on that understanding, you can actually set rules right in there like, deny any destructive operations against production, right? And that might be a database or it might be an AWS account or whatever it is, because it's parsing and understanding all of those commands and scripts and other things. And doing that live in like instantly in milliseconds before they run, right? So while other tools might, try to catch them lower down or things, they just don't have the context to be able to do that well. And they're not doing it before the operation starts. They're doing it like maybe at tool call, if at all, if you're deep in an EDR or something, but who knows even what's happening by the time you get to the kernel. So for us, it's about understanding the intent of that action and being able to make a decision about it right there, and then tell the user or tell the agent actually, hey, this is prod, you probably shouldn't do that, and it will actually respond and slow down, right, and confirm with the user or other things on the way through.
Can you double click on that? Talk about the differences between kind of traditional EDR and the EDR tools that might already be deployed to desktop and what we're doing, and why that's an important differentiation in terms of approach?
Yeah, it's kind of at a different layer. Like a traditional EDR is really sitting there and trying to work out what malicious actions might some random program be taking or malware be taking on this machine right now, and how do I prevent that happening down at the lowest kernel level? And that's a valuable thing. It's a great thing. That's why everyone has them, right? And they're a really important part of your defensive posture. AI operates at a higher level than that, right? This agent is like asking, what system should I talk to? How should I use your browser? How should I talk to your creds? How should I run things in your terminal or otherwise, right? And so it's not just about the lowest level of, are you trying to connect to port X, or you're trying to do, run, malicious command Y, or, whatever. It's more about like the intent of it and how it's thinking about that and the steps it's taking through that session. So we'll even detect, hey, you read from here, but now you're trying to talk out to that website in a separate command. That looks like an elevated risk session. Let's pause on that, right? Which is just at a different layer and a different type of thing. And you can't do that without a different program. It's not the same. Like, it's not going to be the same thing. Embedding deeply in your kernel is not the same as, hey, hooking into those systems and understanding the way it's running and working on your shell there. So for us, what we're trying to do there is really focus in on the system of action and how do we understand what your agent is trying to do on your machine, and then interpret that and make sure we're keeping that safe. While there are many other tools starting to think about, well, how do I stop the PII leaking out? That's important. We do some of that as well, right? But that's much more about how do I stop my information getting to the model, rather than asking the question of like, how do I safely control what the model is doing on my machine right at that time? I mean, for anybody who's been in security for long enough, like, my God, we fought with firewalls to try and do that, and then they end up like Swiss cheese. Then we went and did it with IAM roles and like all that sort of stuff. And it's so hard switching between them and everything. And now we're saying to a user, how are you going to run the stuff on your machine to do your job faster. I just think that's going to be a really challenging, difficult path to take if you think of it in a complete isolation and sandbox strategy. So we're much more, let's watch what they're doing, get all that visibility, and then start giving you some control over it.
We were just at the Gartner Security and Risk Conference, and I ended up talking to a lot of customers there. One of the interesting things that came out of some of those conversations were, hey, yeah, like when our devs are doing this work, they're sandboxing it. They're doing this inside a VM. They only have access to the code that they have access to, et cetera. But where a lot of concern was coming out were people starting to use these tools outside of, the traditional developer user and ecosystem. And I know, we use these things ourselves. Oftentimes, when you're using Claude, you're doing something like that, they're writing little mini programs, little stubs to go out and hit APIs that maybe you have access to in response to something you're prompting. Can you talk about kind of like the use case for this beyond kind of developers who are doing coding and where it may apply more broadly across enterprise customer?
Yeah, I think it's really, we internally, I mean, pretty heavily AI pilled at this point, but generally internally, we've been talking a lot about like all of our finance teams, our people ops teams, our sales teams, etc. We're trying to use this to be productive through all of our tools. And that might be by talking to the database, might be by talking to, through a browser to download files, hooking up a new CLI to talk to, the Stripe API or whatever it might be. Like we're just everywhere now through all those departments. And so what you're trying to do is work out how do I put in a foundation to then start being able to map out all those different things we're talking to and working on. And so, we see, here we have to sort of work out how to embrace the context that we have on the endpoint, starting with the most prolific tools, which is, Claude Code, Cursor, and things like that, but then moving out progressively through all the other ways you're working on that machine at that sort of layer. Every single person right now wants to kind of be AI enhanced. And a lot of people are at the phase right now of like, I just do some chat, but we're seeing very quickly how fast that's changing and moving to being, help me do my job. And to do your job, you got to have access to information. And once you're doing that, then the question is, what control are you doing over the access to that information? Imagine you're talking to a spreadsheet. Do you want to edit it? You might know I don't edit this sheet of the spreadsheet, but does your agent know that, and how do you control that?
Spoke to a few customers as well that were worried about like a summer 26 apocalypse of interns coming in that have been using these tools to automate their daily lives for the last year, and then they they land in a large enterprise and they just start doing stuff, building their own systems and building their own little mini apps to to automate whatever their daily tasks are from their internship. So these tools are coming. One of the things that's in the blog post is if people are in your organization are using these tools, and spoiler alert, they are, like, you really need some way to start looking at it, start understanding what the risk profiles are, and putting policies and controls in place on what they can actually do within your environment. Thank you for that. Very exciting for us. Anytime that we do a launch week and we launch a new product or a new major feature within one of our existing products is very exciting. But having kind of this whole new category, very aligned to what we've done traditionally in terms of looking at events and understanding their context, and then allowing you to write policies to run enforcements on it, is very much aligned to our overall brand and what we're very good at and what we've done for over a decade. But it's also a brand new area, so there's a lot of learning for us to do in this space. And you talk to maybe just a little bit of like who the customers are that we want to partner with early in order to kind of shape the product.
100%. We're desperate and really keen to learn from talking to people and working with you on how you're using these tools. It's moving so fast and there are so many different tools and the patterns aren't well established yet. We have good ideas for what to do and we know how we use it, but we want to work with people who are trying to work that out. And so that looks like enterprises or small, medium business, whatever it might be, where basically you're trying to let people use these tools, but you're trying to work out how can I do that safely and put some understanding and control around it. So if you're in that security team and you're saying, okay, I really got to, maybe you're just blocking it outright right now, but that's not going to last for you, right? The pressure from the business is growing so fast. You're going to have to let people do it. So a tool like this lets you do it, but safely and with information and knowledge to be able to do that, right? Or maybe you're an org where it's already out there you're like, what the hell is going on, right? This will give you complete visibility into that. And then you can see which resources it's talking to, which creds it's using, which accounts it's doing, which users are using it or not using it, wasting your money on licenses, whatever it might be. So that would be really helpful as well. So generally, if you're in the camp of like, hey, this is becoming a big thing and we need to understand it for our org and then start to work out how we're going to control it, we're definitely people that are worth talking to about it.
Thursday launch of Guardian. Really excited about that. Check out the blog post and our product page that's up on the website. We had a huge week of announcements, but we have additional depth, additional things that the team worked on over the last quarter and rolled out. Capture all of that in our B-sides posts. And the B-sides are really where the depth lives, like where we're constantly kind of improving and iterating on our existing products. One of the favorite things of mine that's in there is related to some of the AI stuff that we're talking about. So in the past, if you're using AWS Bedrock and you wanted to like specify, which models are available for end users to use, we would traditionally have like an enum of kind of a list of those models. But the models are coming so fast that our ability to update the mods in order to update the enum, it was going faster than we had the ability to do that. So we finally just pulled the ripcord and said, okay, it's going to be a text field. And then we can do some checking behind the scenes to make sure that that model is actually available. So this works for all of the AI features that are enabled within our own product. I think we just had 2 new models from Anthropic in the last week and a half. So that's really good. And then we expanded our, general service governance across EC2, ECR, Azure SQL, Redis, and GitHub. So just lots of improvements across all of those, improving our event handling, improving our service coverage, etc. SteamPipe also added 5 new community tables, so tons of support from the open source community. PowerPipe got fixes and compliance mods. We even had a responsible security disclosure in this cycle that we solved and pushed out. So huge thank you to the open source community for SteamPipe and the Pipes ecosystem for continuing to extend those tools. I mentioned that we were at the Gartner conference and we had several people come up who were fans of SteamPipe. It's always great when we're in public and talking to people and someone comes up and are a fan of the open source tooling that we've put out there to hear from them. So if you ever see us at a conference and you want some SteamPipe swag, just stop by and tell us you're a fan and we'll hook you up. So for the full rundown of everything in the B-sides post launched today on Friday, and you get to see all the great things that we worked on this last quarter. So thank you very much. Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Nathan, for working with me to do this launch week wrap party. Look forward to all the things that we're going to work on this summer and release in August. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.